Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, Senior Editor at Forbes, and today we are joined by Mark Penn. He is the founder and CEO of Stagwell, a marketing and communications expert, and he is out today with new research that he says affects the future of journalism. Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
You surveyed nearly 50,000 Americans about their news consumption and feelings about ads placed around certain articles. Can you break down for us what are the top line findings of this new research that you say are so important for the future of American news?
Sure. What we've observed is that when it comes to advertising, a lot of the advertisers were very concerned. What if my ad appears next to an explosive news story or controversies as opposed to kind of sports or entertainment? So we set out to survey the public with 50,000 surveys to see how they reacted to different sets of ads in different situations. And what we found is there really isn't much difference. That all this talk about brand safety seems to have been overblown, and it's been systematically demonetizing the advertising against news. And that was creating a vicious cycle of news getting less and less advertising, sports and entertainment more and more advertising, and journalism less and less able to afford the kinds of reporters to create quality journalism.
So there was a Northwestern University report out in November saying that the U.S. loses, on average, 2.5 newspapers per week, and that rate is only increasing. Do you think the findings that you are releasing today have within them data points or messages for publishers that can counteract that trend?
I think this is very important for the future of news because it says advertisers, 25% of the public are news junkies. 11% of the public are not reachable through sports and entertainment, but only news. And these are great upscale information consuming consumers that you should be advertising to. And by the way, rather than paying attention to all this talk about brand safety, pay attention to what's happening to newspapers and journalism. And you can really actually fulfill the social good for your brand of helping further good news.
So were you surprised by these findings or any statistic within what you're releasing today?
Well, I wasn't surprised so much because I'd always suspected that this had been overblown. And in fact, when I ran a $2 billion budget at Microsoft, I redistributed a lot of the budget over to news and found that it was the best performing sites because, as I always say, people don't throw laptops down the field. They use them to consume information. And so I suspected this, and so this study very much confirmed it. Look, it was interesting to look at kind of key groups like moms and high value or high income consumers, and to see kind of very similar types of findings. There are slight differences in how studies perform. Stories perform. Sports did a little bit better. Some Biden stories did a little bit worse with Republicans, but these differences were overall minor.
I wanted to ask you about that because I noticed, especially among those higher income consumers, it wasn't exactly the same. There are a few percentage points differences in how an ad performed when it was next to Trump or Biden versus sports or entertainment. So what do you think the message is for the independence of publishers? Because I think what I worry about is that a cash-strapped publisher will see this data, will see that, yeah, the numbers are roughly the same, but I might be able to make a little more money if I invest in sports and entertainment at the expense of political coverage or investigations?
Well, that all depends upon the rates. So if what you see here is that they perform roughly equal, but there's so much more competition to get on sporting events and entertainment events and less competition to get on news, and particularly news about politics, then you'll find that most likely the rates that you're going to be able to achieve are much lower relative to the performance. And so you're missing out on getting to this important group of consumers, and you're missing out on the good rates.
So what do you think the message to American publishers and newspapers, magazines, publications should be based on this data?
I think first, this whole brand safety thing has been overblown. and you see this massively expanding set of keywords about things you shouldn't advertise near, that's got to be shrunk, down considerably and kind of reevaluated, because the social good for a brand isn't helping further important news getting to consumers. And I think the second big message is advertisers, look at news. What percentage of your budget should really go to news? Probably you're underestimating how much should go to news, and probably you're undervaluing that, and you're not achieving what you could with your media buy.
So advertisers should be spending more. Concerns about brand safety are overblown. How did the concerns about brand safety get overblown? How did we get to where we are right now?
Well, I think that obviously the internet itself does produce a lot of controversial content. And there are a lot of bad things out there, but this brand safety seemed to evolve almost into a censorship type regime where it would really call for the demonetization of certain stories and influence. And maybe it was a good thing when you're talking about some completely hysterical post that you don't want to monetize. But what you really found is it spread to mainstream journalism and stories about Biden and Trump or Israel and Hamas. I mean, those are the kinds of stories we need journalists to be able to have the funds to really get to the bottom of. They have to be able to cover wars and campaigns really effectively. And so I think that this thing got off track.
So you want the nation's top advertisers to see this data and perhaps reallocate their spend?
Yes, I think if they run their computer models, evaluate all the rates, they'll probably find that they've been overspending on entertainment and sports, underspending on news and information, and rebalance their media buys and get everybody appropriately funded.
As a journalist who believes in freedom of the press and coverage of all issues, I feel biased in saying I agree with this, but I do think it's an important message. But Mark, while I have you, you are a polling expert, a political strategist, and you wrote an op-ed this weekend about swing voters and some recent polling about the 2024 presidential election that I'd be remiss not to ask about. You said in this op-ed that swing is king, and you also said, quote, that swing voters in battleground states who are upset about immigration, inflation, climate policy, and foreign affairs are likely to put Mr. Trump back in office if they are not blunted. So what is your message to President Biden after writing this and after analyzing the polls and these swing voters?
Well, I think there were two messages, in the op-ed. One is understand the math of swing voting. If an election is 5-5 and one person switches, it's 6-4. It takes two people to turn out to just equalize that and 3 to win. So the too much emphasis has been put on turnout of base voters and not enough emphasis on the power of swing voters, which means that the campaigns, and particularly the Biden campaign, hadn't really been pitching itself towards the swing voters who are concerned very much about bread and butter issues of inflation, energy, immigration. And I think the second message was specifically to Biden and the campaign, pay attention to this math. This is really the key. And then these New York Times Siena polls came out, and if you read them carefully, they say exactly the same thing that I said. In these polls where Trump is winning, it says, don't worry about some progressives not turning out. Trump's only getting 2% of those. Worry about those moderate centrist voters who are defecting in large numbers because they're unhappy with the direction of the country.
There's been some reporting suggesting that the Biden campaign is not paying enough attention to these polls or is dismissing these polls. How, in your opinion, trustworthy is this polling that just came out?
I think the data is overwhelming and it makes a lot of sense. It suggests that centrist voters are unhappy with basic bread and butter issues around the country. And it suggests that he's been orienting his campaign, too far to the left and been too responsive to elements of the progressive left versus the centrists. And the centrists are really going to decide this. Swing is king. That is the important lesson. And when you look at the Clinton campaign of '96, which I ran, or Obama's campaigns, or even the campaigns of George Bush and compassionate conservatism. The real winning campaigns have really been directed at the center, and that's how you win with a landslide, as opposed to, I think, what you see now is some very tough polling for the Biden administration. So I have these two math lessons, one about swing voters and one about advertising. So bring them together, and a lot of political campaigns should be advertising on the news.
If more advertisers advertise against political coverage, we might get more informed news consumers. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Any other lessons for our Forbes audience today from you, Mark?
No, I think they're clear. News has been undervalued and underappreciated, and news consumers should feel good about the information they consume, and advertisers should feel good about reaching them, and political campaigns have to reach out, I think, even more so to those critical swing voters who are going to be among those incredibly powerful news consumers.
Mark Penn, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.